we go for launch.
5.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting. Anything can happen in the next half hour.
4.
My friend, we cannot keep this a secret any longer.
This whole thing is insane.
3.
Quiet, please. I am analyzing.
Where's the kaboom?
2.
There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom.
1.
I'm like one of those monster kids, you know. I mean, so many people of my generation grew up in front of a TV, and I was always fascinated by monster movies. And, you know, in like the 60s, all the monster models came out, and famous monsters, and all those things that so many of us have in common. So yeah, I've been calling myself Rick Baker Monster Maker since I was about 10. You know? I liked monsters, you know. I mean, granted, I mean, it was cool whenever somebody turned to a skeleton or something like that, you know, or there was some kind of, you know, but it wasn't really the gore, because, I mean, there weren't really the gore kind of movies then either, were there? I mean, you didn't see a lot of that stuff back in those days, especially on television, you know, and I saw most of the films that really got me into this, I saw on television.
Did they scare you? Did the horror movies scare you, or did they fill you with joy?
More fill me with joy. I mean, just with fascination. You know, it's rare that I was ever really frightened of the monsters. And if anything, I really just was attracted to them and liked them, you know. I mean, Frankenstein's monster is a sympathetic character, I think, you know. Besides being cool looking and a great makeup design, you know, I mean, you feel for that guy, you know. And it's not just a masked guy with a knife, you know, killing people as many ways as they can, you know. And you know, I mean, fantasy and science fiction and all that stuff, I just liked unusual looking creatures.
Greetings, my fellow galactic travelers, and welcome back to Planet 8. This is your mission commander Larry speaking to you from our hidden base. Chief Engineer Bob is here by my side as always in the command center, and circling Planet 8 in our orbital spy satellite is Reconnaissance Officer Karen.
And on this episode of Planet 8, we're going to be diving deep into some of our favorite creature designs over the years. God knows there's hundreds of these creature designs that we could talk about, but each of us have selected one to discuss with you all today. And then as we have some time towards the end of the episode, we'll get into some honorable mentions. So straight away, let's kick it up to the satellite. Karen, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Larry. Yeah, you know, we were talking about different things we wanted to discuss on the show, and just thinking about, you know, all the amazing creatures, whether they're aliens, monsters, mutants, dinosaurs, whatever, that we've looked at over the years and thought, wow, you know, how did they do that? How did they design, you know, such an amazing creature, whether it was through, you know, makeup, sculpture, models, what have you. And so, yeah, we just decided, hey, let's talk about them. And so the one that I wanted to talk about today is one that was very early in my fandom, and I'm sure, you know, you guys also love, and our listeners love a great deal, is the original Planet of the Apes designs for, you know, the apes, the chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. You know, there's quite a bit of history and story behind how those amazing makeups came to be. There was a lot of concern initially by the filmmakers whether they could pull it off. You know, the whole fate of the movie really rested on whether they could develop convincing makeups for the ape characters. And at first, you know, they weren't sure that that was possible. They thought, well, maybe we should kind of hedge our bets, and instead of going full ape, maybe the design should be more like a Neanderthal, something a little more human looking. Initial makeup designs were by Ben Nye. He was a very famous makeup artist in Hollywood at that time, and headed up Fox's makeup division. And you can still see these initial screen tests if you go on YouTube and you look up, you know, Planet of the Apes screen test. These were done in 1966. It's really well known, I think, because Edward G. Robinson appears in the screen test as Dr. Zaius, along with Charlton Heston. And you can kind of see the beginnings of the makeup, but it's very crude. It's certainly not the makeup we got in the original film. Sort of resembling an ape, not quite there yet. And certainly the other actors who were in the scene, which was James Brolin, probably to a lot of the younger listeners, better known as the father of Josh Brolin, who became Thanos, and then also Linda Harrison, who, interestingly enough, would go on to play Nova in the Apes films. The two of them were made up to look like what was supposed to be chimpanzees, but really just looks like almost like deformed humans with kind of stretched out lips. They were not made to look very hairy at all. But this was the beginning. This was the screen test, and this was what kind of sold it to the executives at Fox that, okay, this is just our initial screen test, and we're going to do even better makeup. But then Ben Nye sort of was like, well, I'm not sure what else I can do makeup-wise. And they reached out to John Chambers. So John Chambers is a legend in the makeup world. He has a very interesting background. He was the son of Irish immigrants. He was in World War II, he made prosthetic body parts for injured soldiers and for vets. He made facial prosthetics especially. So if somebody had an injury to their face, if they had damage to their nose, to their lips, he learned how to work with prosthetics to cover that up so that they could appear normally. And he also did a lot of dental prosthetic works. And so he was quoted as saying that basically, it kind of took a toll on him even after he left, after the war, and he started working and doing this kind of work in the medical field. Working with those patients, emotionally, it was very hard on him. And so he started thinking, well, maybe I could do something in Hollywood, and he knew how to work with all these materials, these prosthetic materials, latex and plastic and rubber and all these things, and was quite the artisan. And so when he came to Hollywood, he was really sought after, and his work was often seen in shows, but often uncredited. He did things for like the Munsters and Outer Limits, and famously, made Mr. Spock's ears on Star Trek. So he was well known around town. And so, when this challenge of making the apes came around, his name popped up. And so Chambers was brought in to make the ape prosthetics, because they knew that they really needed something that looked realistic and that the actors could wear and emote in. And, Chambers saw this as a unique challenge. So he looked back and he saw from The Wizard of Oz, the Cowardly Lion, and how the actor there was able to emote with all that heavy makeup on. And that really inspired him. And so, with this concept in mind, he started developing these prosthetics. And so basically, he also worked with a number of hand-picked makeup men. Tom Berman was one. Tom Berman was just making his way in the makeup world, although he had a famous father, Ellis Berman, who was also a makeup artist. Dan Strupke and a bunch of other guys who were excellent makeup artists. And so he trained them in how to use these appliances. And he basically had like 4 pieces that he would use. There was a T-shaped brow and nose, 2 mouth pieces, and chin piece. And so they worked like an assembly line. They had a lab running 24/7 because these pieces were so thin and delicate that after they used them, that most of the time they would just tear apart when they had to take them off the actors in the evening. And, they were just working around the clock, applying these pieces to the actors. And, it's amazing when you see the simplicity of the design in a way, like when you see how it's applied to them. But at the time, nobody had done this kind of intricate work. He was able to create these amazing sculptures and then molds from those sculptures. And his work with latex was fairly revolutionary at the time. One of the interesting things talking about it, when they talked to the actors, actors really hadn't experienced that kind of full face prosthetic at that time. Most actors hadn't. And there were a range of experiences. Roddy McDowall, after he first had the appliances put on, kind of went bananas, pun intended. and for about 15 minutes, he was jumping around the stage and making animal noises and throwing his arms up and down and just acting crazy. Poor Kim Hunter when she looked in the mirror, she kind of lost herself. She couldn't figure out, like, it wasn't her, and she didn't know who she was, and she cried for a while.
Oh, wow.
And then Maurice Evans, who played Dr. Zaius, he was delighted. He was like, oh, I'm like a new character. I'm a new person. And he had a completely different experience. So it was really sort of like I don't want to say life-altering experience, but it was a brand new experience for these actors having to wear so much makeup. And for the audiences, they did some tests after they put these new makeups on. And, the executives who saw them were just like baffled. Like, how did you do that? How did you create those makeups? And especially creating appliances that moved with the actors' mouths and allowed them to do their emoting and speaking so convincingly. So, this was just like way beyond what anybody had ever seen at that time. And of course, having the movie come out was quite revolutionary, and it inspired like a whole new group of young makeup artists. Of course, Rick Baker is obviously one. But, we look back on it now, I think all of us still look at that film and just adore it. The makeups, I think, really hold up. They're still believable characters, and the way they're able to emote through the makeup pulls you into this story,
Oh, I agree. I would even go so far as to say, some of the more modern takes, not the CGI version, but there was a version that they came out with, and they really tried to refine and redefine the makeup that they used, and it looked believable, but they were too ape-like at that point.
Mm-hmm.
You're not talking about the Tim Burton version, are you?
Yeah.
I thought they looked less ape-like. They were like almost like humans, slightly deformed. But I mean, I didn't think they looked ape-like at all.
Right. It was really a breaking moment in makeup and effects when that original movie came out back in '68, and it still holds up today. What's a lot of fun, you go to a convention and you'll see some of these folks walking around. A good friend of the show, Don Bishop, has a fantastic ape makeup from that film. It's just so darn believable.
Yeah, I think the key is that John Chambers did such a beautiful, appealing sculpt, for the different faces. They're almost like archetypes. They have an appeal to everyone. And he knew, like, in certain ways that, like, okay, this is maybe less ape-like, but it has, some of the features. I mean, he went more ape-like than they initially wanted. They initially wanted to make it a little more human-looking. But he would do things that maybe were, I don't want to say comical, but like pleasing to the eye, like the way he designed the nose or the curvature of the lips.
Right.
Some of the things he did maybe aren't anatomically the same as an ape's, but you still look at it and say in your head, oh, it's an ape. But maybe it's, like the chimpanzees are pleasing. They don't look threatening. They look, like peaceful, and so you get sort of the impression that you're supposed to get for each of the apes. The gorillas, on the other hand, you do get the impression like, oh, they're probably, tough and warlike. And the orangutans, they're somewhere in the middle there. But yeah, he really conveyed sort of the spirit of those characters through the sculpture.
And, if you think about evolution from Neanderthal to us today, part of what was going on in my mind as well, these are evolved apes. These are evolved chimpanzees. So they're not going to look like what we see in the textbooks or at the zoo. They've evolved.
Right.
So this is what they look like at this point.
They don't look like they do in Lancelot Link, Secret Chimp.
Just last couple of things. Chambers, quite the character, also went on to work with the CIA later on in life. And, pretty famously had helped use his disguise skills to rescue some folks during the Iranian hostage crisis. Also, there were a lot of rumors floating around that he created the Bigfoot that we see in the Patterson-Gimlin film. And that has raged over and over the years with people saying, no, he didn't, it's the wrong time frame. He couldn't have done that. Others people saying, oh yeah, look at this suit in this Lost in Space episode that he did. And I don't know. I have no opinion in the matter, but I find it quite amusing that the guy who did Planet of the Apes also worked for the CIA and is also accused of doing a Bigfoot movie. The guy, that's a larger than life character.
You just shattered all the cryptozoologists out there.
I didn't say what happened one way or the other. I'm just saying
or
that's what they say.
It's all a rumor.
So that's what I got. Who's next?
That's cool. I think we're going to kick it over to the chief, Bob. Take it away.
Well, I had to mull over quite a few monsters. I was going the monster route rather than a creature or alien, whatever route. But I had to settle on King Ghidorah because I think that's like the most amazing monster design. Yeah, I mean, it was designed by Akira Watanabe back for the 1964 movie Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster. And it was basically based on other multi-headed dragons. I mean, you had the seven-headed Hydra in Jason and the Argonauts. You also had the eight-headed Orochi, the eight-headed dragon that was in The Three Treasures, Japanese film from 1959. And in fact, Ghidorah comes from the Japanese word for Hydra, which is Hidora, Hidora. So they added the G on there just because, hey, why not? So if you look at the original, I mean, the design was always the design. 3 heads, 2 tails. I think they shied away from trying to do a monster suit with 8 heads or 7 heads or whatever. But the 3 heads, 2 tails, definitely very distinctive. And if you look at very early production photos of the suit, it's actually the body, the heads, and the inner part of the wings are blue. And then the outer edges of the wings are red. And it looks pretty interesting. But at some point along the line, they made the decision to just paint it all gold, which I think really was the right decision. I mean, the multicolored Ghidorah looks pretty cool when you look at him in stills, but with studio lighting and moving around and things, I don't know if all that color would be all that great. But yeah, basically premiered in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. The actor in the suit basically is moving the legs and holding the body up. His arms are basically folded in front of him, and he's holding on to a bar. In fact, you can see on the suit, it almost looks like breasts, but it's like the actor's arms as he's holding the bars. The rest of it is all puppet work. So you have special effects technicians way up in the rafters of the studio with wires on all 3 heads, 2 tails, the wings. There was like a dozen people up there just coordinating all the movement. And then they made the necks very flexible so that they could get different positions and movements and things. And really, when you look at it in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, and even in Monster Zero, those heads go flailing everywhere, especially when he's flying. They're going up and down to the side, knocking into each other, whatever. But I thought that was cool. That gave it sort of this really frenetic type personality where it's like, everything's going, the heads are going everywhere, and then they would animate the lightning coming out of his mouth. And, sort of like, I think, when they saw the film, it was like, okay, that head looks like it's pointing in the right direction, stick a ray in there. That one's going the right, all right, stick one in there. So basically when he's flying along, his heads are going everywhere, and then lightning is shooting in all different directions. And it really makes for an interesting creature. In fact, the first time I saw King Ghidorah was actually in the follow-up movie Monster Zero. And when Yoshio Tsuchiya, as the ruler of Planet X, says, "I will show you Monster Zero," and presses the button, and here he is. Here's Ghidorah flying over these hills on Planet X, and yeah, the head's going everywhere and the lightning flying everywhere. And I thought, oh, this is so cool. Yeah, I was probably a kid back then, but I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. But yeah, he would come back in Destroy All Monsters in 1968, and the necks seemed a little more stiff, so you didn't quite get that frenetic movement of the heads. It was more, pretty much they were fairly straight, and they would curve up, down, left, right. But he would also make an appearance again in Godzilla vs. Gigan in 1972, and it was the same suit between all four movies. So by the time he got to 1972, the suit was looking kind of ragged. But then again, so was Godzilla. The Godzilla suit they made for Destroy All Monsters in 68, they used in Destroy All Monsters and Godzilla's Revenge and Godzilla vs. Ghidorah and Godzilla vs. Gigan. And that one as well is pretty beat up by then. In fact, there's a scene as Godzilla is approaching the Godzilla Tower that if your TV's big enough and your Blu-ray's sharp enough, you can see Haruo Nakajima's thumb sticking out of the glove of one of the hands. That's how. In fact, when Godzilla attempts to get up a couple times after he was beaten to the ground, you can see it was almost like it fit in with the 70s. It was like fringe hanging off underneath his arms as he would get up. But Ghidorah was in no better shape by then, and they would retire him basically until 1991 when they did Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, and it was a whole new suit, whole new Ghidorah. In fact, he wasn't a space monster in that one. He was basically mutated from three creatures called Dorats. And I don't know, there was something about that suit that I thought was kind of lacking, and maybe it was the fact that, they tried to make everything so, basically not frenetic. Basically, the necks were very straight, and they'd move around, but not in this crazy motion.
More balanced.
Yeah, pretty much. And then after that, he wouldn't come back until Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack, which was about 11 years later. And he was basically almost like a young Ghidorah, because he was the original monsters in that were not supposed to be Mothra and Ghidorah. It was supposed to be Varan and Anguirus, but Toho wanted the big hitters in there. So when they made Ghidorah, they couldn't make him bigger, stronger than Godzilla as he was in the other films. They had to make him sort of a younger version. The wings aren't quite as prominent. They're there, but they're just kind of hanging. But as time went on, he would also fight Mothra in Mothra 3 and kind of return in Godzilla Final Wars. That was
Didn't
like Kaiser
Ghidorah. Didn't he in the Mothra movie?
No. Well, they had one called Death Ghidorah in the first. And but yeah, the one in Final Wars had 4 legs.
Okay, all right. And then there was the Mecha one, right?
That was like Kaiser Ghidorah. Yeah, in 1991 they did like a Mecha
right.
King Ghidorah. And that was actually based on a Yuji Kaida cover of Uchusen magazine. He did a based on Mechanical Ghidorah on that. And Shinji Nishikawa, who designed most of the monsters in the Heisei series and into the Millennium series, he based it on that. So yeah, it was pretty cool. And then, of course, we had Ghidorah in all CGI glory in the legendary Godzilla King of the Monsters. Mm-hmm. And,
right.
That one was interesting because they had a different actor playing each head.
Oh, wow.
And so you'd have TJ Storm, and he was basically playing Godzilla with his green suit, the ping pong balls. And then you've got 3 actors playing Ghidorah. And let's see, I had them listed here. Let's see, that would be Jason Lyles, who also did like CG work in Rampage. And there was Alan Maxon and Richard Dorton. And they would basically put their arms around each other, and then they'd move their heads around and make expressions. But they basically did that so that each head would have a different personality and make different expressions. And it worked out pretty well. Like I say, it was more kind of serpentine, the way he moved and curved around and flew. But it was always, what would Ghidorah look like if he was, CG? And there we got our answer.
Was one of the heads supposed to be kind of dopey?
Yeah, they basically, I think, they named the heads 1, 2, 3, or in Japanese like Ichi-ni-san. Mm-hmm. And then if you're Ghidorah, your left head was nicknamed Kevin because he was kind of always kind of the dopey one. But
okay.
So yeah, I mean, it is quite interesting. He kind of became a cult favorite with all the Godzilla fans out there. But yeah, I mean, all these different ways to bring Ghidorah back to, or to bring him to life. In fact, he even appeared in 2 episodes of a Japanese superhero show by Toho called Zone Fighter. And that was probably the last time the original suit was used. But
did they use the suit or borrow the suit for Pee-wee's Big Adventure? In the finale, they had Godzilla.
No.
Oh.
That was our friend Cleve Hall.
Huh.
He built the Ghidorah suit and the Godzilla suit for that.
Oh, wow.
So yeah,
spot on.
Yeah, he did a great job. And yeah, he's gone now, unfortunately. But yeah, he loved that stuff. In fact, if you watch Monster Man, he's got a couple episodes. He's got there's one specific episode where he gets to build a monster and a superhero to fight it. And he's just has to play the monster. And that's really where you get an idea of what these actors went through, because he's in this monster suit and you can only go so long and he ends up just passing out. Because there's there's not a lot of room to breathe in there. They're heavy, they're hot. And I mean, if you think about in 64, it wasn't as bad as 10 years earlier when they did Godzilla King of the Monsters, and the suit was basically rubber with bamboo framework, and the actor, Haruo Nakajima, through most of it, they were getting, rubber burns and, lacerations, everything else in that suit. But, by the time they got to Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, obviously the Godzilla suit had much more mobility to it. And I'm sure whatever technology they came up with, Ghidorah, was good as well. And, I know they would line them instead of just having rubber there. So, later on, they would actually put oxygen tanks and things in, so you can, for when Kenpachiro Satsuma as Godzilla in the 90s would go underwater, he'd have he'd have apparatus so he could breathe. Whereas Haruo Nakajima in the 60s, he'd go underwater. He'd just have to hold his breath until he popped back up again. So
yeah. Wow. I know one year I was lucky enough, I went to WonderCon and I got to talk to Peter Mayhew for a bit, who played Chewbacca, but he was also the Minotaur in Minotaur in Sinbad.
Yeah.
And I talked to him a little bit about the Minotaur suit, and he was, oh yeah, that was tough. That was a tough suit to wear. And I asked him about Chewbacca, and he said, well, the first Chewbacca suit was difficult. He goes, now though, they've got it all lined with these cooling units, and there's a little air blowing on my face, and so it's the difference in decades, right? The technology is there to make sure that the performer's taken care of. So.
It's true. And it's interesting to think. I mean, I don't want to jump ahead. I know I still have my slot, but there are a lot of creatures in Star Wars that went the CGI route as the series progressed, movies and TV. But something like a Wookiee, like Chewbacca, always remained a man in a suit.
Mm-hmm. There's something to be said for that.
Back in the early 90s, I went down to Burbank, and they were shooting Ultraman, the Ultimate Hero. And we got to watch them do some scenes, film some scenes. And the monsters were all really big. So they all had what they called them NASA cooling units inside, like they used in the spacesuits. But Ultraman is skin tight, so you couldn't have that. So they had these gallon jugs all lined up, which had Gatorade, and they would add potassium pills in there, or potassium tablets. And so the actor, after he'd do a scene, he'd pull the helmet down and he drank a bunch of Gatorade. And, he was chugging these all day long. And I was I asked the director, I'm like, so what happens when this guy has to go to the bathroom, chugging all that Gatorade? He goes, well, he doesn't go to the bathroom. He sweats it all out in the suit. That's how hot it is, and how, because it's basically like wearing a padded, skin diving suit.
Right.
Yeah. Scuba suit.
Having a wetsuit on all day.
Yeah.
Well, and you hear some of these guys say they'll lose, 10 pounds or whatever. They're just sweating it all off. They're dehydrated.
And it wasn't, what they did with Ultraman Powered or Ultraman, the Ultimate Hero, is they shot outside in Burbank. Now, it's still hot in Burbank, but instead of having studio lights, they had giant reflectors, and they would reflect the sun to create the lighting. Whereas a lot of the Japanese actors, they're under not just all this rubber, but also the hot studio lights.
Yeah.
And they could generally go about, 10 minutes. Nakajima could make about 10 minutes in the suit. And he lasted longer than most. And they would basically unzip him, pull him out of the suit for a break, and then they'd empty like a couple inches of sweat out of the bottom of the suit because it was so hot in there.
It must have smelled horrible. That suit, like after a while, man, that must have been rank.
Oh, well, we have Dennis Lancaster's Godzilla suit at a lot of our shows. And that thing, man, that thing's probably 30 years old and just all the funk that's inside. And Dennis cleans it out and he airs it out and, hits it with Febreze or whatever. But I had a guy, I brought it to work one time because I had to take it to the theater that day. And one of the guys at work is like, "Oh, please let me wear it. Please, I gotta put it on. I gotta stomp around the warehouse. I gotta put it on." I'm like, "All right, go ahead and put it on." So we got him in the suit, and as soon as we got him all Velcroed up, his comment was, "I can smell my ass." And I said, "I got news for you, pal. That's probably not your ass." That's the funk of 30 years of people wearing that suit.
Oh, my God.
So, yeah, and the Godzilla suits, they recycle them in a few movies or they make new ones. But, yeah, 10 minutes in there and it's probably already got the funk going.
Funky Godzilla.
Well, that was cool. All right, boys and girls, your mission commander went back and forth, and finally settled on the iconic creature belovedly known to us as King Kong. I picked Kong because of all the creatures that I was looking at, he has gone through the most changes. And, a lot of them have longevity. Kong's over 80 years, going on 90 years. In another couple of years, he'll be 90 years old, 90 years young. Willis O'Brien, the first movie was back in the 1930s, 1933. And Marcel Delgado is the man who actually, drilled the joints in the arms and the metal frame together. And then they made the animatronic Kong that was in the first film. I think they used the same design. They may have made a new one for Son of Kong. And it worked so well. They used it for Mighty Joe Young and, some other films that needed a fairly large ape. After that, though, they went to Man in a Suit, and that was the Japanese King Kong versus Godzilla movie. And that was in the 60s, Bob?
62.
62, because I know the next movie was King Kong Escapes was 67, a year before your mission commander was introduced to this Earth by Mr. and Mrs. Mission Commander.
Okay.
King Kong Escapes is one of my favorite Kong movies. I love the original, but the whole concept, and that's why I brought up Mecha Ghidorah. I love Mecha Godzilla, Mecha King Ghidorah, Mecha Kong, a robot King Kong. To this day, I wish they would do a modern take on that.
Well, where that Mechani-Kong actually started out.
Where is that, Chief?
In the cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
In the Rankin Bass cartoon. There's actually Doctor Who is in the cartoon, and the Mechani-Kong faces off with King Kong. Because the 67 King Kong Escapes was a co-production between Toho and Rankin Bass. So a lot of it was kind of based on that cartoon.
Yeah. And that's true. There were a lot of animated versions of Kong as well, but I'm going to focus on and comic books. We were talking about some comic book versions of Kong. I'm focusing on the movies. We may dive a little bit into the cartoons, but we get into 1976, and it was Rick Baker who designed. He was the man in the suit. the majority of Kong that we see in that King Kong movie is him in a suit. It's a Dino De Laurentiis production, and so there's about $500,000 or $600,000 that was poured into this mechanical. I forget how many feet tall this Kong was, and it was hydraulics. And we talked about this in our King Kong episode before, so I won't really spend too much time on it. But it is staggering to think what they tried to accomplish, and they couldn't get the thing to work well. So it's in about 10 or 15 seconds worth of film. In that version of Kong, if you see Kong, the part of the movie where he's escaping and they put the crown on him, and he's kind of seems like he's having a seizure, that's the mechanical Kong.
As I recall, the hydraulics had a malfunction, and it looked like he was peeing down his leg.
Well, we've gone to a number of monster paloozas. We've heard about Bruce the Shark and Jaws. We've heard about gone to some of the Walt Disney presentations of the Tiki Room and the Pirates, and the whole discussion when they're going to do a mechanical version of a monster, a creature, or a person is, do you go with pneumatics, which is air, or hydraulics, which is fluid? With hydraulics, if a line breaks, it looks like the thing is peeing or bleeding, depending on where the break is on the creature. If it's pneumatics and there's a line break, well, the thing's going to fart because it's air. So anyway, that's how I remember pneumatics and the difference between pneumatics.
I know when they were hyping the movie and they were talking about that mechanical Kong, the mechanical Kong, they were going to use that supposedly in like almost every scene.
Oh, yeah.
That's what they were touting. And then I think when they got it and all it did was just kind of move its arms and cock its head back and forth, that was like, okay, bring in the suit.
There's a great book, and we may have mentioned this before, Ray Morton, The History of a Movie Icon, King Kong. And they have some really good pictures of that mechanical King Kong. There's also a book by Bruce Bahrenberg, and I'm sure we mentioned this before, the creation of Dino De Laurentiis' Kong, and they have some pictures of them, starting to put the thing together, and just how it's not going to work. No bueno. But hey, conceptually, it was a great idea. Practically, not much.
And the Japanese never learned from it, because for Return of Godzilla, they made a giant mechanical Godzilla, just like that Kong. And yeah, he's in about as many scenes as Kong was. And they use him on publicity tours and that type of thing. But yeah, as far as the movies,
the pictures are really cool. I mean, and I know the Godzilla you're talking about, Bob. I mean, but this gave Rick Baker an opportunity to really shine in this film. I mean, again, not taken away from the 1933 Kong. I love that version. But, his eyes would show emotion. And, yes, they had the big mechanical hand that they would utilize in almost all the Kong movies to pick up, in this case, Jessica Lange's character. But, whether he was fighting the snake or just eating, or, even when they gassed him and he fell over. I mean, it just, at the time, if you watch it now, maybe it doesn't hold up. I think it does. But at the time, it was amazing. The only complaint I'll have about that, the 76 Kong, is the poster had this massive, standing on both towers of the World Trade Center with a, Air Force jet in one hand, and they see the movie. And again, not taken away from Rick Baker, but it's a drastically different designed ape than on that poster.
Well, going back to Godzilla, Cinema shares Godzilla versus Megalon. The poster for that was Godzilla and Megalon facing off on top of the Twin Towers.
Yeah.
Which never happened ever in the movie because they're in Japan the whole time. So
Right.
Well, the towers were very popular when they were first built, so everybody wanted to utilize them. But yeah, that King Kong poster, man, I had that poster up on my wall. I wanted to see that movie so bad before it came out. It was, and I loved that movie. And in a lot of ways, and I know it's blasphemous, that's more my Kong in a lot of ways than the original, just because it just hit at the right time for me at that age, you know. And yeah, I had the poster, I had all the little knickknacks and, you know, other stuff. And yeah, Larry, that makeup, the mask, that you know, the sculpt that Baker did for the face and everything, and the way he was able to emote, you know, yeah. And they're using, I mean, this is where we start getting into more the modern age of prosthetics and you know, design. You know, they had different masks and they had different facial expressions, and you know, you had people off stage working things to move the brows and, you know, the cheekbones and stuff. But he had a lot of expression in the face, and you could tell, oh, he's angry, oh, he's titillated by, you know, Dwan in the waterfall, or oh, he's, you know, he's in pain or whatever. So, you know, he had a complete character because of the way he was able to emote.
And you almost feel like whatever they learned from the Planet of the Apes effects and the makeup, they kind of incorporated into this design. He didn't wear clothes or anything like that or talk, but you're right. His lips, you know, could move. There, you know, he could do a snarl. He could do a smirk. He could, his brows would open wide when he was surprised or. So
well, Baker would go on though to do the apes in, what was it, Congo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With Sigourney Weaver, and then he had to create the apes to look like real apes. I mean, they weren't supposed to be, you know, a monster or a evolutionary, you know, speaking ape. Those were supposed to be just real live apes in the jungle.
Right.
He's done a lot of different ape makeups or designs.
I think he did Schlock as well.
That's a deep dive there, Chief.
That's right.
But yeah, it was. It's not Kino Lorber. Was it Shout Factory that came out with the?
Yeah, very nice.
The 76. Great transfer. I mean, you know, the colors are bright and vibrant. I haven't listened to all of the interviews and bonus material on it, but if you folks haven't had a chance, check that out. Anyway, you know, it's almost a decade later, and we get King Kong Lives.
Oh.
And yeah, that's about all I'll say about that. Check out our King Kong podcast.
On to the next movie.
On to the next movie. They had the next King Kong, or version of King Kong, was Peter Jackson's 2005, or was it 6? I think it's 2005.
2005, like 8-hour version or whatever.
Oh, to me, at least the head, it was closer to the 76 poster.
I actually liked the head on that one, the face. He had that one tooth like sticking up, and he looked kind of like he'd been through a few battles before.
Right. You know, the scar and stuff like that. Yeah. And this was 100% CGI, but they utilized Andy Serkis to wear a suit, and which, interestingly enough, tying Planet of the Apes to this, Andy Serkis would be utilized to be Caesar later on in not Peter Jackson, but in the more modern Planet of the Apes films. You know, this movie, to me, I don't know. It's okay. I understand the decisions that they went to go with CGI. I mean, after, you know, the success that they had with Gollum and Lord of the Rings and some other films, they went with it. Not my favorite film out of the series, but the design is good. I think the design was closer to a huge gorilla that we see in the zoo. I mean, we've all, you know, seen them out there. And a matter of fact, I really realized that when we were at a family vacation at Disney World. Walker, remember we went to the Animal Kingdom, and that ape was just having a good time with that Frisbee and his water bowl and just entertaining himself, you know, not even caring if we were there or not.
Right. This one in Jackson's film is definitely more of a giant gorilla, whereas before, you know, Kong was sort of a man ape, and I think it was more, I don't know why the original stop motion was designed that way, because you could have made it more gorilla-like as far as his posture. I mean, obviously with a suit you're kind of limited, and maybe you have to make it a little more upright and everything. But yeah, this one is definitely the first where it was really, it's really more like just a giant gorilla and not a mix of a man and an ape, you know?
Well, I think up until then, I mean, Kong was considered more a monster than he happened to look like a gorilla, but they wanted to make him a monster. And, you know, especially with the Rick Baker, I mean, he walked upright quite a bit, you know, not a lot of I mean, the 33 version, at least he was crouching and on all fours and a lot. Yeah. But he also, you know, walked. When he's walking through the village and eating natives and things, you know, he's not on all fours. He's walking upright. But yeah, I think with Jackson's, he was more quadruped and...
And the way that he acted and reacted to his environment and, you know, the people, the giant bats, you know, prey, predator, just seemed more like a more accurate portrayal.
I guess...
Oh, go ahead, Walker.
Sorry. I guess, you know, thinking about it a little bit more, if you're going to have him interact, if you're going to have Kong interact with, is it usually Anne, the female character? If you're going to have him interact with the female character, then I suppose you want him to be more than just an animal, right? Mm-hmm. You want him to have some sort of mentality or a soul or something that we figure is more than just an animal. And so maybe that is sort of the rationale
to us.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's the bridge that, it's a fair point. What I wanted to mention too is I know we said I said I was talking about movies, but with the failure of the De Laurentiis mechanical hydraulic Kong, that technology was ultimately utilized in the Kong that was at the Universal Studios tour.
Oh, yeah.
There was this huge version of Kong. For those of you that went on the tram ride, and he was there for a better part of a decade before a fire, unfortunately, burned that part of the attraction down. And what Universal did is, just like in cinema, rather than rebuild a pneumatic or a hydraulic version of Kong, they did a CGI version of him. The tram goes through this tunnel, and, you know, T-Rexes and Kong and spiders and all these giant things are jumping around the tram as you go through it. And you have to put on your special Kong 3D glasses because it's all in 3D. And
long live William Castle. I said, long live William Castle.
Yeah. Exactly. I've had the good fortune of experiencing both versions of the Kong ride. I'm sure there's YouTube video, at least of the old Kong, and I forget how many pieces or how many feet of material they had to drape over that robot version of Kong.
That one was cool. I really liked the old original one.
Yeah,
there's nothing like practical effects. Because you were really looking out. You could see you were looking out of the tram. There was nothing between you and that Kong, that big face, and that was cool.
In later years, before it burned down, they added a banana smell. So as you got closer to Kong, you started smelling bananas. But anyway, on to probably after the first film. Second is Mecha Kong, so this would be my third favorite. Kong Skull Island.
Yeah.
Man, he kicks ass in this movie like nobody's business. I love it. And Samuel Jackson can play such a bleep hole in this. And he does. He really just adds to this film. John Goodman's in it for a bit of time. Speaking of William Castle, I finally saw that matinee movie we were talking about before, Bob.
Oh, you finally watched it? Yeah, no, that's great. Love it.
Yeah, good movie. This movie's awesome. Don't
forget Loki and Captain Marvel are in it too.
You're right.
Tom Hiddleston is in there, and Brie Larson.
Yes. And they're great in it too. What's his name?
John C. Reilly.
John C. Reilly. I love that guy.
And he has also been in a Marvel movie. He was in Guardians. So now John Goodman needs to be in a Marvel movie. Then almost the whole cast could have been Marvel movies.
Well, you know, with that Spider-Man movie coming out in December, one never knows.
Yeah, I think Kong is in that too, right?
Yeah.
Spider Kong from another.
He's going to play the Gibbon.
So
no, Skull Island. I love Skull Island. I could watch that 100 times and not get bored of that movie.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I was going to ask you guys what you thought of it. I mean, that's more of a modern take. They built upon the CGI version from 2005, and I think they just blew it out of the water. I mean, when he stands erect, like, you know, the challenge is on with the helicopters, and he starts like, that's like, man.
I like that design much better than the Jackson design. I think they kind of went back to like, what's the classic Kong look, you know? And yeah, he's less of the animal ape, and he's more the classic kind of, I don't know, not necessarily the 1933, but yeah, he has more that monster look than the animal look to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you, there's a scene where he's eating, I think it's a squid or an octopus, and you know, he gets wet, and the beads of water falling off his fur. You know, it's some of the best CGI I've ever seen. I mean, we love practical effects, without a doubt, but that was just awesome.
Well, when you build something to that kind of scale, it would be hard to do on a practical level, you know? Mm-hmm. I mean, they've blown Kong up to such a huge, and that's another thing, like his size now. You went from a guy who was maybe 30 feet tall in the beginning, and now, he's got to be several hundred feet tall.
Well, see, in Kong Skull Island, he was supposed to be a younger Kong. Because he grows up. He's got to grow up a whole lot more to be anywhere near Godzilla size,
right? In
Godzilla versus Kong.
Yeah, that's a good. You know, the funny thing is, Bob, I've never thought of Kong as like a monster. You know, but some people think like the Terminator's a monster too. So I don't know. At some point, we should probably have a discussion. I know we talked about vampires versus ghouls versus zombies. We should kind of like, you know, what is a monster?
Well, I mean, it's a very loosely defined term. I mean, you know, in real life, we call people who, you know, do horrible things monsters. So, yeah. You know.
It's interesting. Bob made a good point. I mean, you know, he's stepping on people, he's biting heads off. You know, it's like, well, that is a very monstrous activity.
Yeah, I'm sure, you know, when they pitched it, they said, we're going to make a monster movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
a monster movie with a giant ape.
Yeah. I think this is also when they started tying in or connecting the tissues with the new version of Godzilla. Because the next movie we get is King Kong or Godzilla versus Kong, and the Monarch, you know, storyline is carried through, and the you know, predators and the apex predators and all that come into play. And my wife, Jazz, Lieutenant Jasmine, had only ever seen like bits and pieces of Godzilla. She had a you know, limited knowledge of Godzilla, somewhat aware of King Kong, and we watched Godzilla versus Kong, and I, you know, was lukewarm on it when I first saw it. Jasmine loved. We had to watch it 2 or 3 times. I mean, she just really loved this movie. I think for me in this movie, it's a good film, but Kong was just too evolved at that point for me. I mean, there was a society of Kongs, and he utilized the tool or a weapon, and I don't know. I should probably watch it again to just kind of figure out.
The way I look at it is Universal / Legendary. They own Kong. Mm-hmm. They can do Kong movies till the end of time. Now Toho owns Godzilla, and that was the last Legendary Godzilla movie under the original Toho contract. Mm-hmm. So if they want to use Godzilla again, they've got to renegotiate, come up with a new contract, work under Toho, blah, 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 blah. So I think what they did with Godzilla versus Kong, it's like, okay, well, let's give Godzilla some cool scenes, but this is a Kong movie. And, you know, we're going to give Kong, because if you're going to continue a series of movies with Kong, then he sort of has to have more of an intelligence, more of a personality, more of a, human characteristics than just having a bunch of movies with a big ape in it.
That's a fair point. And that was part of what we were talking about with the 76 version is there's more of, connection between us and Kong than in the 2005 version. So I will look upon this movie with fresh eyes, Chief.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to do like a 2-hour, 3-hour movie with a big ape. But if you're going to do half a dozen 2-hour movies with a big ape, that's like, 12 hours of a big ape? Hey, you better be a little more interesting than grunting and growling and running around.
Yeah. I'd like to say that's a fair point. That'll something to consider when I take a look at that again. But anyway, yeah, that was my pick, King Kong. It was fascinating to me, the different versions of Kong throughout the 80 plus years. He was a puppet that was on screen, and then man in a suit. Tried to be a mechanical version, and then ultimately wound up in CGI. So we'll see, what he'll turn up, in another 10 or 15 years as
hologram.
Hologram, exactly.
Well, I think like in the next 10 or 15 years, you'll probably have multiple legendary Kong films, basically. I think he's going to carry on the MonsterVerse rather than Godzilla at this point.
And, it's funny, I haven't heard anything from that studio if they're going to continue the Monarch storyline, start fresh. So I don't know. We'll see.
They could be in heated discussions with Toho as we speak. Who knows?
Dun, dun, dun.
But if Toho wants more money or they can't agree on things, then it's all Kong at that point.
Yeah, very true. Well, kid, we're almost at the end of the show, but we did promise some honorable mentions. So before we get into the censor sweep, did either of you twos want to mention an honorable mention creature design that is iconic and a favorite of yours, or all of them?
Well, there's so many, right? I know we've talked about some of them. I think I know what some of you guys' are, which are probably favorites of mine. I'll throw out the original Alien because it's changed a lot over the years, but I love that original design, especially with the transparent skull where you can see like the empty eye sockets. It's just one of the most like terrifying creature designs ever. And of course, it's inspired a lot of copycats that were nowhere near as good. I would say Alien is one of my favorites.
Very good.
People who have listened to the podcast know that I have an affection for the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Oh, yes.
Which was an amazing monster suit for its time because it had a lot of detail, it was very well built. It had air bladders in the gills so that they would open and close as he's walking along, and the mouth was moving, and just to be able to swim underwater with that suit as well. I mean, that was just so amazing. The other thing I was considering for this episode, there's a Japanese designer named Tol Narita, and he designed all the monsters for Ultra Q, Ultraman, and into Ultra 7. And his designs, if you look at things like Balton or Zeton, very, very unique, especially his aliens. But also monsters are, you look at Ghidorah, who's going to be in the next in Shin Ultraman. It's like, here's this monster with this big cone-shaped head for about half the episode, and then you find out that the cone opens and his actual head is underneath. And things like that. I was always amazed by his designs growing up. So, other than just mentioning a monster, I would say Tol Narita would be someone to take note of as far as designing creatures go.
That's cool. I was thinking about the Bigfoot from Harry and the Hendersons, but I thought, well...
But then Karen shattered your dreams about Bigfoot.
We'll save that for a potential future episode. A favorite of all of ours, we've actually done a podcast on the Predator films is the Predator. Stan Winston, once again, hit it out of the park. But this was one of the early jobs that Stan Winston Studios had. And I think all of us were fortunate enough to be at the presentation at Monsterpalooza, where some of those folks that brought the Predator mask and costume and makeup, in that mask to life, talked about filming and getting that suit to look as realistic as they could. And what an original design as well.
Oh, yeah. One of my absolute favorites, too.
Not necessarily based on anything else that we have seen or experienced, or at least that I can think of. I mean, yeah, it just works so well. And, to their credit, they're coming out with yet another Predator movie. I think next year, is it 2023. It's going to be a prequel of sorts where the Predator is going to fight an American Indian. Have you guys heard about that?
I've heard about it. Yep. Well, I hope it's good. That's all I've got to say.
Fingers
That's
crossed.
sort of the opposite of Cowboys versus Aliens.
Every time they come out with a new Predator movie, it's like, fingers crossed, let's hope this one. The Predators look great in the film. It's just the story that's kind of...
Right.
But, okay, kids.
Well, one of these days, we got to get Steve Wang on the show. Steve basically made the mask for the original Predator, painted it up, and he was a big part of that.
Mm-hmm.
That would be cool.
Yeah, I think he was a part of the panel at Monsterpalooza. I think it was him and Matt Rose, and I'm probably forgetting everybody else. But yeah, that was a wonderful panel that year, and they really, you could just tell that they knew they had done something special. And of course, we're all still talking about it decades later. So
there was an amusing story that they told where the one device, it could only blow up once. And they didn't think to let it blow up multiple times because they might have to take a second take. And so it blew up, and luckily they didn't have, if I'm remembering the story right, they didn't have to rebuild it or anything. It just, worked out well for them.
Yeah, those guys, I mean, they were brought in after that initial ant type suit did not work out too well. So they were really running and gunning and trying to get this thing done. And of course, part of their Winston shop was also working on Monster Squad, right, while they were trying to get this done. So yeah, quite a story. I know we talked about it a little bit before, but it bears repeating that, was a amazing project that they wound up giving us.
Well, I know Larry mentioned matinee earlier. How about Mant?
On the Blu-ray that I got, Bob, they have the whole Mant movie available to watch, and I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, they originally had that on the Laserdisc. I was disappointed they did not have that on the DVD release, but luckily, yes, they have it on the Blu-ray.
Yeah. So I'll, we'll leave it at that. We keep on. I could go on and on, but
yeah, we could have a 4-hour episode.
I know, right?
Please leave your eyes at the door. You will not need them.
Lord Bloodraw's Nerve-Wracking Auditorium presents the best of old-time radio, horror, and science fiction. Tales of terror and the uncanny that unfold on the stage of your imagination. Come experience the magic of old-time radio horror. Lord Bloodraw's Nerve-Wracking Auditorium is available on Spotify, Apple, Google, and other podcast providers. Lord Bloodraw's Nerve-Wracking Auditorium, when you seek the darkness.
This is the part of the podcast where we have our censor sweep. And yours truly has this episode censor sweep. This came across my desk, and my lovely wife purchased this for me as a early Christmas present. Now, this is the beauty, and sometimes not so beauty, of the hall. Like, okay, here's a cool ornament that is of the Batcave from the 1966 Batman, and it has Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson on the top getting ready to swing down the bat poles. But how do you put that on a Christmas tree? How does that tie in with the Yuletide? They don't, sing any Christmas carols or anything like that. But this thing is so cool. We'll have a picture of it on the webpage. But it has, like I said, Bruce Wayne, Dick Grayson, up on the top, getting on the bat poles. And the detail is amazing. It actually has their names above them, like in the show. Off to the left side, there's the bat phone, and when you push the button, it runs off of batteries. The bat phone starts blinking, and there's dialogue, and obviously the Batman movie. The bust is there that opens the secret door, and the doors actually open and close, and there's the bat computer down in the bat cave. There's a lower level, and when that door opens up, they're in costume, and it's not on the Christmas tree, but it is over here on my desk, and as with all these other flotsam and jetsam of genre-related products.
You know, it could take the place of the nativity scene below the Christmas tree.
Well, I have it parked next to the Lego Batmobile, so I thought that was a fitting spot for it. But if you guys get a chance, it's on the Hallmark website right now. I don't think they've sold out. I'm pretty sure it will sell out because it's a little fun, you know, whether it's an ornament or just a conversation piece that you have on your desk at home. I highly recommend it.
If it does take place in the nativity scene, I'm sure at some point there's got to be some Robin dialogue where he says holy, right?
Well, you know, what I was thinking, Bob, when I got it, is that they'd be singing, you know, Batmobile or Robin Lady.
Batman smells, yeah.
Yeah, but, you know, lost opportunity. Anyway, that draws this episode to a close. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. Make sure to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Until next time, cut. That's it.
On that note, this will conclude this transmission from Planet 8. We would like to thank all of our intergalactic audience for listening. Be sure to head on over to our website at www.planet8podcast.com, where you can get more information on this episode's topic.
For more conversation, find us on Twitter at Planet8Cast.
Or on Facebook at facebook.com/Planet8Podcast.
We want to thank you guys for tuning in each and every episode. We look forward to your input and opinions. Until next time, this is Planet 8 signing off. End transmission.
By George, he's got it. It is the end.
Some of my beautiful rubber creatures, and you know, love rubber. Oh God, I smell it.